Hook is an absolute masterpiece from 1991. And if you know all the details behind the scenes, you'll keep pointing to the screen and wanting to tell everyone the secret like you just saw Viggo break his toe for the millionth time. And yes, everyone knows Aragorn broke his toe when he kicked the helmet at this point. Despite the fact that it was nominated for a handful of Academy Awards, it wasn't well liked by critics. And even the director, Steven Spielberg, wound up hating his own film. This movie is straight up bangarang. And if you know nothing about this movie, no, I'm not talking about the Skrillex song. Bangarang is really a good thing. But on the subject of movie, this movie was actually scored by John Williams. John Williams, the guy who did some of the most famous music in all of cinematic history. But that's not the only big name here. There's so many heavy hitters, even beyond the music and director, there are like tons, but let's just dive in. Hook is the story of Peter Pan after he grows up. Starring Robin Williams as Peter, it shows him as a family man watching his daughter Maggie's play, a performance of Peter Pan, which gets interrupted by Peter getting a business call and agreeing to go to a meeting while simultaneously promising to see his son Jack's baseball game. And by the way, Jack is also the same actor who plays the drunk nerd in the teen comedy Can't Hardly Wait, even though nowadays he's a lawyer apparently. But that's a bit of a tangent. We cut to Peter deep in the corporate world, where you can immediately tell he's both very important at his company, despite a cheesy who can answer the phone faster game, which is kind of ridiculous, but whatever. But it also is very obvious that he's incredibly eager to get to his son's baseball game. And of course, Peter misses his son's game, and his son is so disappointed he loses focus, strikes out, and loses the big game. This is a perfect example of key storytelling that Hollywood used to do, but they somehow forgot about it. It's all about show, don't tell. In a movie today, we might get some sort of scene where all the main characters sit around and explain this all to you, just like, hey, you're working too hard and you need to spend more time with your family. Here, you show it. If you just explain it, the audience doesn't feel that connection. They don't get actually emotionally attached. But in the first 6 minutes of this movie, we are introduced to Peter's entire family. We understand his relationships with them. We feel bad for his son, Jack, because we see how disappointed he is that his dad broke his promise, missing the baseball game. And we see that Peter is a workaholic, but still obviously loves his kids. We don't have to be told anything as the audience because we get to see it and feel it for ourselves. And it makes us really connect with the characters so much more. Then we cut to the family flying to England, showing that Peter is actually terrified of flying, which is a nice little character thing to add to Peter, who famously has the ability to fly in Peter Pan. But then arriving in England, we cue our next big actor, Maggie Smith, playing Granny Wendy, who's wearing some absolutely masterfully done old age makeup. When I saw this movie as a kid, I just thought she was just that old, and it was so believable. Granted, here she is over 20 years later and looking better than she did in Hook, but that's a big reason why this movie got one of its Academy Award nominations. We come to find out that Peter was actually adopted by Wendy, and she's helped so many children, she's having a children's hospital dedicated to her. But not before we get a pretty crucial moment of Peter snapping at his kids because he's dealing with stressful work stuff.
Everybody just shut up! I'm sorry.
And this is also pretty key for the story and character development. More of those things that Hollywood kind of forgets about in storytelling nowadays. There's a nice dedication dinner for the hospital, but then Peter, his wife, and Granny Wendy come home to find that their kids have been taken by Hook. Peter doesn't remember Hook, but Granny Wendy finally tries to jog Peter's memory that he is really Peter Pan, and she does it in a way that's kind of weird from Peter's perspective. As Granny Wendy, the woman who adopted and raised him, not so subtly hints that they had a thing, and she was even thinking about him on her wedding day. In context, from Peter's perspective, is really kind of unsettling, but that's such a small note in the movie that you kind of glance over it without realizing it. And she explains that apparently when Peter saw her granddaughter, that's when he decided he never wanted to go back to Neverland. I would give this movie a little bit of a hard time for telling and not showing here, but this entire point comes back around in a way that makes more sense later. And when it's done here, it intentionally feels weird and uncomfortable because it's from Peter's perspective. And when it's done later, it shows in a much more effective way. So after his kids are kidnapped, his adoptive Granny Wendy semi-hits on him and tries to convince him he's a storybook character. Peter pours himself a drink, and that kind of makes sense. Introduce big name number 2, Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell. She tries to get him to Neverland, but since he doesn't really believe in all of this, he doesn't really have any happy thoughts anymore. And she practically knocks him out and flies him to Neverland herself. Cue the first major Easter egg. This couple floating up because they're so happy. Yeah, that's George Lucas and Carrie Fisher, aka the director of Star Wars and Princess Leia. And then we get introduced to Neverland, where this movie really starts to shine because the sets and the costumes and everything are so incredibly done that you really feel immersed in Neverland. Then some pirates actually try to steal Peter's shoes, which leads to another Easter egg because this pirate is secretly Jimmy Buffett. Tink proceeds to beat the crap out of all the pirates, and Peter disguises himself as a pirate, where we see Bob Hoskins as Smee getting Hook's hook to present to him. And along the way to get Hook his hook, we get back-to-back Easter eggs. Because with this sort of chanting moment from all the pirates, where they say, and this song is actually chanted by Jim Cummings, aka Winnie the Pooh, and also the substitute voice of Scar for half of the song Be Prepared in The Lion King. But then we're finally introduced to Hook, played by Dustin Hoffman, and immediately get another cameo from David Crosby, the singer from the band The Byrds, who gets to shout out, "Long live the Hook!" And then Hook, like any good tyrannical dictator / cult leader, calls out that someone here didn't believe in him. And of course, Peter panics, and it's actually this pirate. And this pirate just so happens to secretly be Glenn Close. So he proceeds to lock them in a pirate's chest and fill it with scorpions. Did I mention this is supposed to be a kid's movie? Anyways, Hook flaunts that he has Peter's kids, and Peter can't hold it in anymore. But Hook can't believe this guy is actually Peter until Smee convinces him. Hook is so disappointed, all he wants is a war and a battle. But Peter tries to pay him off to get his kids back. Hook says no. And tries to provoke Peter into showing he's really Peter Pan by hoisting up his kids and trying to get him to fly up to them. But when Peter can't do this, despite the absolute dad killer of a comment from his daughter,
Come on, Daddy, Mommy could do it.
Which as a dad, this really hits hard, Tink has to step in and make a deal that she'll get Peter back to being Peter Pan in 3 days. So Hook is pumped to get his war and agrees. Right up until the moment a pirate accidentally knocks Peter into the water while his hands are tied behind his back, and Tink wind up thinking he's dead, leading to Peter being saved by a bunch of mermaids who give him mouth to mouth and deliver him to the Lost Boys. And then we get to introduce an absolutely awesome group of kids. All the child actors here are pretty amazing, and they're led by the one, the only, and this dude was like the epitome of cool when I was a kid, which could not have had a better person to later voice Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. But since no one knows he's actually Peter Pan, they assume he's a pirate and they try to kill him, and it shows off how awesome this place is for kids. Like, this is peak 90s kids fun, despite the semi-molesting flower. There's skateboarding and basketball and chaos and all sorts of fun. But Tink finally gets a word in, trying to convince everyone of the truth. Rufio gets very territorial and oddly democratic, putting it up for a vote. And it's very one-sided until we get a nice moment with this adorable kid. The kid plays with his face, pulling his face back like half the cast of Selling Sunset, and seeing that under the wrinkles, it's actually Peter. Cut to Hook and Smee talking about the coming war, where we get to really see hidden intentions behind the acting, because apparently Dustin Hoffman and Bob Hoskins in this scene decided to secretly play these characters as a gay couple. And now that I know that, I can never not think about it when I see this, but Hook becomes super overdramatic, threatens to off himself, and gets all mopey until Smee comes up with the idea to brainwash Peter's kids into loving them, which of course, Hook takes credit for. Then we get a great montage of the Lost Boys trying to get Peter into shape and back to being Peter Pan with a great and insulting workout chant.
You are old and overweight. You are old and overweight. Get that one off the ground.
Then, after the montage, we get one of the most iconic moments of the movie, the Lost Boys dinner, which is absolutely filled with great one-liners from Robin Williams. The Lost Boys eat imaginary food, and Peter, not having any imagination, can't see the food.
Eat what? There's nothing here. Gandhi ate more than this.
But his frustration leads to an insult battle between him and Rufio, which is very one-sided until Peter's pushed too far, leading to one of the best insults in a children's movie.
Nearsighted gynecologist.
Peter, finally playing along, unlocks his imagination and a fun food fight with the Lost Boys, which Rufio wants some payback, and Peter's instincts finally kick in. And then right after that, as things calm down, we get a transition to an unbelievably sincere moment with Thud Butt.
What's your happy thought, Ted?
Mine's my mother.
Yes, that's his character's name, Thud Butt. The next day, we get to catch up on Hook's brainwashing of the children as he gets Jack to smash a bunch of clocks, including a watch that was actually gifted to him by his dad earlier in the movie, and really steering things towards loving Hook and replacing his dad. The Lost Boys have a final idea to get Peter to remember everything about being Pan by sneaking into pirate territory and stealing Hook's hook, where he finds Hook having a baseball game for Jack and realizes that he's being replaced, basically crushing his soul as a father. Peter has some new determination, pushing himself to figure out how to fly, but still struggling until his shadow points him towards a little secret hideout from his Pan days, where we find Tink all dressed up for Peter. And Peter finally starts to remember. He starts to remember his life in Neverland, and he actually remembers meeting Wendy, played by a young Gwyneth Paltrow, in case this doesn't have enough stars in it already. And this is obviously before she started selling ridiculous health products and vagina candles. But she eventually grows old while Peter never ages, until Peter sees Wendy's granddaughter sleeping and thinks, damn, she's kind of cute, and never goes back to Neverland. But then comes a flood of memories, most importantly, becoming a dad, and finally finding his happy thought, letting him fly. And Pan is back, and he immediately pantses Rufio, but Rufio shows some growth and accepts Peter as Pan, and everyone is pumped. Then we get a very random scene that probably could have been cut, where Peter randomly gets so caught up with everything, his memory tweaks, he forgets he's a father and has kids, until Tink suddenly turns big, kisses Peter, confesses her love to him, and then he's like, wait, I love my wife and I gotta save my kids. So the Lost Boys suit up for war, and they show up just in time to interrupt Hook, fully indoctrinating Peter's son, who has gotten so brainwashed in 3 days he hardly remembers his own dad. Peter starts to fight, lets Jack know he was his happy thought, and we get a playful battle with the Lost Boys and the pirates, filled with blinding pirates with mirrors, eggs, and fruits, tripping them with jawbreakers, and of course Thudbutt rolling down inclines like a bowling ball and hitting pirates in the nuts. It's all fun and joyful, and the Lost Boys are winning until we get to the battle between Rufio and Hook while Peter is busy saving his daughter. And Peter comes back just in time to see Hook kill Rufio right in front of Jack in the most emotionally devastating moment of the film. Like, seriously, this absolutely destroyed me as a kid. It destroyed me rewatching it for this video. It hits home. This moment basically traumatizes Jack, and Peter losing his new friend makes things go from playful to serious real quick. But Jack snaps back to reality and wants to go home, understandably, after seeing a kid get murdered right in front of him in this kid's movie. And that's all Peter really cares about, so he's about to leave with his kids until Hook threatens to come after his kids again, and basically any of his ancestors, which is basically the definition of F around and find out. Cue a sword fight between Peter and Hook, which is more impactful than 80% of Marvel's CGI fests lately. Like, it's just a one-on-one sword fight, but it's so well done. Peter is about to kill him until his daughter convinces him to spare him. Hook tries to take advantage of this, but fails, screams for his mommy, and then gets eaten by a giant taxidermied crocodile. Everyone celebrates while Peter's kids are standing traumatized, just wanting to go home. But Peter finally notices, so we have a heartwarming moment where Tinkerbell spreads fairy dust on his kids. Peter tells them to think happy thoughts to fly, and of course, Maggie, who's made it known she loves her mom more, thinks of mommy, but Jack gets to really show some love for his dad. And as they start to fly off, if you look close, you can actually see the actress who played Maggie is definitely a bit scared of flying up, possibly so much so that it looks like they use a different stand-in for the next shot of them flying away. But Peter hands over the leadership of the Lost Boys to Thudbutt, as he has the biggest heartwarming smile I can probably handle at this point, which is a nice refresher after the complete devastation you feel from Rufio's death. The kids fly back to their beds, and Mom is so overjoyed she can hardly believe it, which you have to remember, as far as she knows, her kids were kidnapped, then her husband just disappeared for 3 days, and hopefully Granny Wendy came up with a really good lie for Peter, or there might be some weird time dilation with Neverland, but who knows? It's not like they're going to dive into it that deep and overthink it as much as I do. Peter wakes up at the base of a Peter Pan statue where we see Bob Hoskins cleaning up the park, which feels like it's trying to hint that maybe it's all a dream, but that's immediately shattered as Tinkerbell shows up to say goodbye, which then implies that Smee bailed from Neverland in the middle of the battle, snuck back to our world, but thought that the best way to blend in is by cleaning up litter at the local park. Anyways, Peter heads home while thinking he can fly, so to anyone else, he's coming off as extra crazy, especially as he answers a work call and talks about Neverland and fairy dust. But he gets back to his family, throws his work cell phone out the window, showing work is going to start taking a back seat to the rest of life. And just in case anyone thought maybe that goodbye from Tinkerbell was a lingering part of the dream, and maybe it still wasn't real, their kooky, crazy family friend sprinkles some fairy dust on himself and starts flying right out the window. Peter's wife Moira is way too chill about all of this, since it's straight up magic that suddenly starts happening in front of her. And we get a great closing line with,
"To live will be an awfully big adventure."
If you've never seen this movie in its entirety, I highly recommend it, no matter your age. Because when I saw this as a kid, this sparked so much wonder in me. And I always wanted to find ways to watch it again because I didn't own it. But I always got so excited when it happened to be showing on TV. I wanted the adventure of going to this version of Neverland, to play in that awesome Lost Boys hideout, and meet all of the incredible characters, hoping that Rufio didn't actually die. I mean, obviously it made an impact on me. I'm making a deep dive YouTube video about it 33 years after it was originally released. But now, as an adult and as a parent, this hits in so many different ways that I didn't expect when I went to rewatch it for making this video. While I've never personally missed anything important because of my work, even the feeling of frustration because your kids won't stop screaming while you're on the phone felt a little more real. But what hits my soul is feeling the disappointment in the children's eyes when their dad fails to save them, only amplified by the great child acting in this movie. The heartbreak Robin Williams' character feels when he feels like he's being replaced as a father. The incredible love and joy behind the idea that your kids are your happy thought. They're the reason that you can overcome all of your fears and fly. It all rings so true and so close to home in ways that I just didn't expect. So I really can't recommend this enough, but that's just my opinion. I really recommend going and check it out for yourself. If you want more of my opinions or rants about stuff, subscribe if that's your thing. And even if it's not, thanks for watching. And never forget, to live would be an awfully big adventure.